All right, today we are diving deep into a really fascinating take on biblical prophecy. It's a wild story that connects ancient Hebrew scriptures, the powerful kings of Persia, and a really specific moment in the 19th century. We're talking about a thread that runs through millennia, and it all seems to point to a single time and place. So you have to ask yourself, how on earth could a 2,500-year-old prophecy find its solution in the 1800s? Well, the argument we're exploring today is that a certain set of prophecies, if you follow them just right, don't point to some vague, far-off future. No, they point to a precise year. And the clues, it's claimed, were laid down thousands of years ago with a really strong Persian connection. Okay, first things first, we've got to clear up a key piece of language. When these old texts talk about the end times, it's often a mistranslation. The real meaning is something more like the end of the age. So think less world-ending apocalypse and more the closing of one spiritual chapter and the beginning of a brand new one. So if we're looking for the start of this, let's call it a prophetic clock, where would you even begin to look? You might be surprised. The argument is that the key isn't in Israel at all. It's with the kings of ancient Persia. Yeah, it's an unlikely starting point, so let's check it out. I mean, listen to this. The prophet Isaiah says something that must have been absolutely shocking back then. He names Cyrus the Great, a Persian king, a non-Jew, a Zoroastrian, as God's shepherd, and even his anointed. And what's his mission? To rebuild the holy city of Jerusalem. And right there, that's the foundation for this whole interpretation. It's the official orders, the decrees from these Persian kings, Cyrus and later Darius and Artaxerxes, to get Jerusalem back on its feet that officially starts the countdown clock we find in the book of Daniel. And you know, this isn't just some small mention, a little footnote in the text. Look at this. These three Persian kings pop up dozens and dozens of times in the Jewish scriptures. That suggests they play a really central role in this whole story. Okay, so how does a royal decree from a Persian king in the ancient world translate into a specific date hundreds of years down the line? Well, according to this interpretation, the answer is hidden in a kind of numerical code in the book of Daniel. And here is the key that supposedly unlocks it all. It's a principle you can find in other parts of the Bible. In prophetic language, 1 day equals 1 year. You just have to remember that rule. 1 day stands for 1 year. That's the tool we're going to use to do the math. So let's put this rule to the test. Daniel has this 70-week prophecy. It starts with the edict from King Artaxerxes in 457 BC. Now, 70 weeks is 490 days. Using our day for a year rule, that becomes 490 years. And what happens when you add 490 years to 457 BC? You land right on 33 AD, the year of Christ's martyrdom. Pretty specific, right? But get this. This is where it gets really interesting. That exact same starting point, the Persian decree in 457 BC, is also the trigger for another, much longer timeline that's also in the book of Daniel. Daniel talks about 2,300 days that have to pass before the sanctuary is cleansed. So if we take that same starting date, 457 BC, and apply that same day for a year rule, the calculation takes us to a very specific and much more modern year. Yup, the math leads directly to the year 1844. This, the argument goes, is the predicted time of the end. Not the end of the world, but the dawn of that new age we talked about at the beginning. So the huge question is, what on earth happened in 1844? And this is where that Persian connection comes roaring back. According to the Baha'i Faith, this exact year, 1844, is the start of their entire story, with two prophetic figures who came from, you guessed it, Persia. So in May of 1844, in the Persian city of Shiraz, a young man who became known as the Bab, which means the gate, declared his divine mission. He said his job was to prepare the way for an even greater messenger, who turned out to be Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah would later announce that he was the promised one that all the world's religions had been waiting for. And this idea is absolutely central to the Baha'i Faith. They see this moment as the end of the prophetic era, the age of all the past prophets like Moses, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and the start of a whole new era of fulfillment where all those ancient promises finally come true. But hold on, the connections don't just stop with the date. The source we're looking at argues that the prophecies also point to very specific places on the map that line up perfectly with the story of the Bab and Baha'u'llah.
For instance, the prophet Jeremiah gives us another puzzle piece. He talks about a divine throne being set up in a place called Elam. So the obvious question is, where in the world is Elam?
Well, here's the direct link. Elam is just an ancient name for a region in western Persia, or modern-day Iran. And the city of Shiraz, where the Bab made his big declaration in 1844, is sitting right in the heart of what used to be Elam. So you have a direct line connecting the person, the time, and the prophesied place. Then, the prophet Micah adds another location to this prophetic map. He talks about a journey to Babylon, where some kind of deliverance would take place. And here's another one of those connections that makes you go, Baha'u'llah, after being exiled from Persia, made his public declaration in 1863. And where was he? In Baghdad, a city built just a stone's throw away from the ancient ruins of Babylon. And finally, this source points to a crazy, detailed prophecy in Micah that seems to lay out the rest of Baha'u'llah's life as an exile. It talks about a journey from Assyria, where Baghdad is, to fortified cities, across a river, from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. And this sequence, as you can see, almost perfectly mirrors Baha'u'llah's forced travels from Baghdad to Constantinople, across the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and finally to Mount Carmel in what is now Israel. So, at the end of the day, you're left with this big question. Are all of these connections, the Persian kings, that super specific date of 1844, the exact locations of Elam and Babylon, are they all just a wild series of historical coincidences? Or could they be the unfolding of a prophetic blueprint that was laid down 2,500 years ago? We've laid out the pieces of the puzzle. What you make of it is up to you.